and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley Boyz of WhatCulture, Michael Hamlet and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT, pay-per-views, we have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. As I said, though, joined by Michael Hamlet and Michael Sidgwick. But gents, we are gathered here today to talk about the future of WWE and their new directions after WrestleMania 36. Michael Hamlet, some very interesting avenues opening up after a two-night WrestleMania. Your thoughts?
I know it's an audio medium, but I just feel like shrugging for the entire subject matter of this discussion. This is one of them podcasts that we could put on the board or the calendar at the start of the year and be like, wow, post-WrestleMania season, WWE like to consider it a hard reset, and what are we going to do? What they should do is nothing. Those should be the post-WrestleMania plans. They should be like the plans like the rest of us have got, which is to just stop and take a breath and think and start again when it's safe to do so. And that's not like a flippant answer to your question as well. It will have a detrimental effect on everything they're trying to do. It has already had a detrimental effect on the plan to anoint Roman Reigns Universal Champion again at WrestleMania, directly impacted by the world around them. They had to go with Braun Strowman. So as far as the second choice goes, he's in, a pretty good position now, but he's effectively a paper champion, and he's going to continue to be one. This is a cursed reign for what is looking increasingly like a cursed career. And my worry is that anytime you try and apply the standard pro wrestling way of doing things to wrestling at this moment, it makes characters worse. Bianca Belair's WrestleMania debut and then subsequent Raw in-ring debut would ever be thought of like Enzo and Cass's post-Raw debut, or Seth Rollins winning the Universal title at WrestleMania or winning the WWE title at WrestleMania. It won't be held up in like those treasured memories of people. It'll just be like, just another random thing that happened in the empty arena era. I would love them as a central plan to kind of do nothing. And if they absolutely have to put shows on, if they insist on weekly churn and regular matches, as awful as this might sound in principle, have the matches mean as little as possible. Because the last thing you want to do is make people care about a story, because it's nearly impossible to pay that story off. We saw that at WrestleMania without the tricks of the Firefly Funhouse and the Boneyard match. Even Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins, which was far better than Edge and Randy Orton, but I would think of those two programs as the ones that had good TV bills. They just couldn't possibly live up to the decent promo work that was built to them. The matches can never properly satisfy even good empty arena television.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite weird, this, because ultimately, in order to make this halfway viable, what you have to do is completely disrupt. If you're WWE, that is, you have to completely disrupt your creative process, because as completely unfortunate as all of this was, it kind of came at none of this was ideal, but kind of halfway fortuitous time for WWE that they had to cancel shows right when they'd already built a lot of storylines, because I think the idea among fans was it would be a shame almost to not see Edge versus Randy Orton in some kind of capacity. They'd already had the luxury of building something and creating a sense of anticipation for something in like the ordinary normal context. So even though something like Edge and Randy Orton, in theory, the execution I thought was abysmal. In theory, the match itself was bittersweet in that you wanted to see it still, but under different circumstances. They can't really do this anymore. They can't build a storyline anymore. They're still going to have to do this because of the way that their mentality is and the fact that they're building towards Money in the Bank. So what you're going to see is hardly kind of a storyline that you've seen play out in front of thousands upon thousands of fans, and Drew got over in front of thousands of fans, and his storyline got over in front of thousands and thousands of fans. What you're going to see is these weird, we've used this analogy countless times, but that South Park episode of Pro Wrestling, you're going to see that be the A, B, C, D, E, F. All of it is going to be the South Park episode, and there's going to be no way of knowing what's really getting over. There's going to be no pops. There's going to be no moments when there's a turn happening and a transgression. Like, it's all going to feel so amateurish, so bad. Like, WrestleMania 36 got by just on the fumes and on the echoes of what these things were before they became empty arena shows. This is turning into like the new normal way of doing things, and it's never going to feel normal to me. It's going to be so bad.
Yeah, it's sort of inexplicable that they're continuing on. I think a lot of people had presumed that after the Raw and maybe after the SmackDown, after WrestleMania, they'd sort of have a season finale, draw a line and go away for a while. But recent reports seem to suggest otherwise. Live shows from the Performance Center, WrestleVotes confirming that Monday Night Raw is going to be live from the Performance Center next week. There is obviously the advertisements we saw over WrestleMania weekend for Money in the Bank in May. How on earth they're going to pull that off, I have no idea. But presuming if they do just plow on ahead, Michael Sidgwick, who do you think, or I should say, what do you think is next for WWE champion Drew McIntyre? He had his first title defense 20 minutes after winning the title, defeating the Big Show, as we saw last night on Raw. But what's next for him?
Again, it's a strange one. It's really hard to contend with this question. I've been wrestling with how much I liked or disliked this Big Show segment. I know he gets parachuted in every now and again, to fulfill a certain purpose for a couple of weeks at a time, and he just will inexplicably turn babyface or heel, but that's decidedly normal. It was almost, in fact, a comfort to see Big Show completely switch allegiances out of nowhere compared to the role he'd been playing alongside Kevin Owens and Samoa Joe. It felt like maybe this world is going to be all right. Maybe this is normal. This is what normalcy feels like. Thank you, Big Show, for being the plot device and not the human being that you are. It was really nice. But to be less facetious about things, is it a WWE thing to do to just have Big Show be his first post-Mania opponent, irrespective of the circumstances? Like, is this the direction they would have taken anyway, or is it just these Raw one-shots? Because he's not really been positioned in his odd, like, very brief returns over the past 2 years as a big sort of major main event player. It's just been kind of a ratings grab, or maybe the schedules aligned or they needed him or something like that. So I'd like to think that's not what's in Drew McIntyre's immediate future, even though doing a kind of running that back with a stipulation is very much a WWE thing to do. If you look at the landscape of Raw, again, this is hard because what's Raw anymore? You've got people from NXT on it for enforced reasons. You don't know who's going to be there full time. You don't know which performers have opted out. You don't know which performers might yet opt out. Realistically, what I would do personally, if I was in charge of WWE Creative, and thank Christ I'm not, is I would, for 2 reasons, run Drew McIntyre versus Aleister Black as that big major program. You've pushed Aleister Black. You've done it for months at this point. It's kind of worked, and if it isn't working, it doesn't matter because it's not in front of fans. The people watching at home, the real committed ones, looking at those ratings, do seem to really like Aleister Black, and with good reason. And more to the point, he is such a presence in these empty arena scenarios that you can almost feel him. He's very eerie. His character, and more to the point, his act works in this context. I would run these two together because I think Aleister Black has got something somehow in this weird context.
Storylines just require, like, any storylines at this point, like, that aren't based on wrestler A versus wrestler B, which I'm guessing Drew versus Black would be. It's like now time for them to fight. They just don't function properly in the empty arena. The Mandy Rose Otis thing at WrestleMania would have been one of the biggest pops of the night, and they were robbed of that by that scene. And my worry for Drew is that accidentally, by being inserted into an angle, he will look like a weakened champion because the angles don't land all that well in the empty arena. My preference for this, I've sort of alluded to it on the Raw podcast, that why I like the Big Show thing was just that somebody would think, fancy a crack at this title, and Drew was sort of positioned himself at a guy that would defend it. I'd quite like them to go down a US Open Challenge route, as John Cena did, but with the WWE champion, Drew McIntyre. He can acknowledge without overtly acknowledging that circumstances are different than normal, but he is aware that people are around. It's the Performance Center. It's Orlando, Florida. He knows that there are wrestlers about. He knows that there's a competitive edge to that locker room and the people are vying for him, and just let the challengers come. It's not particularly. It's atypical for WWE to say build a pay-per-view around that, but the next show is Money in the Bank, so you don't actually need to push a title program if you don't want to. It can go secondary to the main stipulation. The idea that Drew will turn up, there was an element of excitement about him defending the title on Raw last night because there was an anxiety that he might lose it, which was sort of unique to feel something, even if it was just a certain fear on that Raw. So if they were to just sort of say that if you got used to the idea that every week an opponent was going to come out and they were going to have a banger with Drew, as they used to with John Cena, every week those Cena matches drew you into thinking that potentially somebody nowhere near Cena in the pecking order, was going to beat him for the title. If Drew is as good as he has proven himself to be over the past few months, he'll be able to capture that with the right opponents. And if nothing else, there'll just be something of a certain quality of the shows. Again, it doesn't feel particularly typical to how WWE would book it. It's certainly just how I would choose to do it, because I don't really want to watch storylines play out because they're hard to believe.
Indeed. When it comes to the Universal Championship, as you mentioned there, Braun Strowman defeating Goldberg in, 2 moves, effectively, at WrestleMania on night 1. Hamlet, who do you think should be the first challenger for that title?
The Big Show. So he's tried Drew, and he's massive, and it'll look daft for Braun to take out the Big Show again. Just this idea that he's this troublemaker trying to promote his Netflix show by winning a belt. I think it would be actually quite amusing for them to acknowledge just oh, this guy's here again. And he tries and then he fails. Braun is a slightly different case to Drew because I don't think the bangers are expected here. It's bizarre how coming out of WrestleMania, we have a new Universal Champion who was a 48 hours replacement, and he's not at all a talking point. I find that really, really weird. And I'm not sure if it's just the circumstances with which we're all operating in, or if it's a comment on how meaningless the the Braun and Goldberg match felt. So he needs a program that's going to make him feel current and relevant again. And I just don't think there's anybody, and Cedric might have somebody in the back of his mind, but I don't think there's anybody on that SmackDown roster that feels like they can make Braun feel more relevant than the guy he beat at WrestleMania in Goldberg. The only guy is Roman Reigns, and he's nowhere to be found. The best they did was position Baron Corbin as the secondary heel on SmackDown, and he got beat at WrestleMania. So I, again, think you probably have to go down a novelty route like Big Show, or if they can get Kane on the phone, dare I even say it. Just
Jesus Christ.
I know, I don't even want to be thinking I'm pitching someone like that, but I just can't see who you've got when Braun, as irrelevant as he currently feels, they can't just go oh, well, Bobby Roode, I'll see you at Money in the Bank. And that's not a dig at Bobby Roode. It's just there's just nobody elevated on that SmackDown show that feels remotely ready for a shot at Braun Strowman. Roman Reigns is a different kettle of fish. He had the ability to kind of elevate some of the people he was working with to make the program feel more important. Braun, being airlifted at this position, needed somebody to make him feel relevant. It was Sami Zayn and Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura that were making Braun feel relevant, not the other way around. And now he's the guy that's supposed to be carrying his end of the programs. I can't see it working.
Yeah, I would have my concerns about Braun Strowman, even in regular circumstances, as your talisman of a brand at this point. I think he's cooked. I think physically he's been nowhere near the level he was at 2017. I think a man of his proportions means he'll never recover that form. If you just look at someone like that, his knees are going to be screwed, and he can never, for me, recover that propulsive form that he had as this horse who could sprint, and it was just a genuinely awe-inspiring spectacle that reduced people to awed children back in 2017. That Braun's gone. I don't think they've compensated for his weaknesses by booking him strongly. It just feels incongruous that he's wearing that title. Frankly, his behavior ahead of WrestleMania weekend I found pretty deplorable. He's turned himself heel in my eyes, and he was already irrelevant and kind of boring before that anyway. What I'm getting at is I've probably got a stronger opinion on Braun than most, but he's not felt relevant in absolutely ages. I think the general consensus was that he was totally cooked. You're not going to get, even in the normal circumstances, a great Universal title run out of Braun Strowman at this point. I think it's optimistic to think he can even try. It's just, he hasn't felt like world title or the man material in literally years. And if you consider how long his career's been, that's kind of an indictment of him as a performer, in my opinion. For my personal tastes, if he's to do something really watchable and really give him a chance to impress against a proper, solid presence, I would pair him with Sheamus. I would definitely pair him with Sheamus because if one thing I took away from WrestleMania 36, and in fact the Kenny Omega versus Trent match from Dynamite last week, it's that genuine physicality, stripping away the veneer of performance and just emulating a proper gnarly scrap of fight is what can only work in these empty arena performances. And Sheamus is snug as hell, stiff as a bastard. He could really put a beating on Braun Strowman. You could finally see that Braun Strowman isn't the guy who dances with the New Day or does these stunts that lost their charm a long time ago. He could be the guy who beats the piss out of people after himself getting the piss beaten out of him, and you can have him slapping beef. Slapping beef is the key to getting over for me.
Yeah, I think if you're going to make me put money on this, I was going to go with Sheamus. Like you say, he's been built relatively well since he came back, just murdering the likes of Shorty G and Apollo Crews. And yeah, I think he's been campaigning for, a real opposition. And now you've got someone who is holding the championship who, again, like you say, you feel that they just pulled the trigger on far, far too late. But it's a very, very easy build of, Sheamus hitting a brogue kick, maybe doing his big moves on Braun Strowman just to showcase that he can pull off stuff like that. I think that makes the most sense. It might not be the most thrilling of booking decisions, but I sense that's the route that WWE are going to go down. Sidgwick, in terms of good development of storyline that we saw at WrestleMania, you have to look at Bayley and Sasha Banks. Of course, Bayley emerged from that five-way elimination match, still SmackDown Women's Champion, but her relationship with Sasha Banks even more frayed. And I'm not suggesting that we should pull the trigger on this match immediately by, say, Money in the Bank, but you can certainly see a path, whether or not WWE put it on or how on earth we get to SummerSlam, but a path for, I think, 5 years on, a running back of a classic match of theirs.
In those 5 years, how often have you seen Sasha Banks and Bayley just separate to one another in storylines? Between 2015 and 2020, how long have they been apart? Is it less combined than the time they've been associated in some capacity? That's a genuine question, by the way.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, much, much less. Only injuries or the odd, like Sasha's exit last year has kept them apart.
So I just can't be asked. I can't be asked with this match at all. And trust me when I say this, right? That Brooklyn match in 2015 is one of my favorite matches of all time. This is one of my favorite periods to be a professional wrestling fan of all time. It inspired me to write a book about the process of NXT, a brand that, in my opinion, at its peak, is not only as special as a lot of periods of pro wrestling, but as advanced in terms of how great it is as a work. I love that so much, and yet I never want to revisit it on the main roster again. It's not the fact that even if they can do 7.5/8 out of 10 version of what is for me a 10 out of 10 5-star all-timer of a rivalry in a program, I just don't want to say it anymore. I just think their association, the relentless splits and teasers and reconciliations and tension, it's a load of complete and utter creatively bankrupt bollocks. And I would like it if there was an actual law decreed that they cannot interact with one another ever again.
Well, to echo Wilborn's best mate, I got some bad news because I think Sasha's going to win Money in the Bank to further this storyline at this point. I'm not as low on the eventual match that we're surely going to get between Sasha and Bayley as Sidgwick, but I wasn't particularly high on it until I thought they handled the WrestleMania match really well. That was an old play on the Triple H Batista Randy Orton finish in the Elimination Chamber, where you just have the heel sitting back while their friend gets pinned, which they've not really gone so well with too often. So it's quite nice to see that finish rolled out for them Bayley to get the win. Thought Bayley and Sasha did a pretty admirable job of carrying along that 5-way at WrestleMania. It wasn't easy. It was too long, but it wasn't the easiest thing to get through. And I thought they did a pretty good job of it. And Sasha having that briefcase while them two are still on terms is just something to delay the inevitable. And as long as that inevitable is back in arenas, I think we'll be all right. I think the briefcase will be that sort of that last physical clue that Sasha's babyface turn on Bayley is coming. And to their credit, to the creative team's credit, whilst Bayley has been struggling to feel out this character, I think they've given her a lot of ammunition to get there, and she's getting better with it. It's how she enters, all stoic, doesn't particularly mirror up to this arrogant, obnoxious braggart that she is in the match, or mirror her desperation that she seems to show when she's worried about losing the title or anything like that. But I think she is starting to find something with her character. She's starting to find a voice with the character. And Sasha, on Sunday, especially, felt like a babyface in waiting again. I haven't really. We talked about their singles match at WrestleMania, and I couldn't have been any less interested in it because neither of them felt close to a believable rivalry. And then all of a sudden, I bit again on it. And Sasha having that briefcase, I think, will just be that constant tease. And because you get 12 months out of that briefcase, and please God, let this go no longer than 12 months, we will have a point where they can save it and save it and save it and save it. The turn could even come with the cash in. It doesn't need to be, now I've shown you my true colors, I'm going to cash this in. It can just be, she can cash in, and that can be the babyface turn. Bayley can become so insufferable that Sasha just taking the title off her can be the pop. That feels like a natural place to go with that women's briefcase.
I agree. I think Bayley is really growing into this role more and more, and hopefully WWE just let her do some more stuff, because all it seems they've done is tell her to cut her hair and attack the Bayley buddies and then give her the most generic heel promos in the interim. But I really liked on Sunday, there was a moment where I think it was Michael Cole was shouting, they almost pinned both Sasha and Bayley there, with Naomi and Lacey Evans both hitting a move. And Bayley, of course, because you can hear everything, just shouted, no, they didn't. And I thought she looked fantastic there. And I completely agree. Money in the Bank, I'm going to suggest who I think should win that in a second. But they bloody love wordplay, Monster in the Bank, etc. And with Sasha Banks' surname, you can just see the T-shirts already being printed.
What would they read, Wilborn?
Money in the Sasha. Right.
Oh, sorry, that was brilliant there. Bit of an inside baseball. There was the stream froze and it cut to Sidgwick's head in his hands when you pitched the idea of Money in the Banks.
Let's talk about someone who I think should win Money in the Bank, because I cannot believe that they didn't put the title on her on Saturday. That is Shayna Baszler. How do they fix Shayna Baszler and the likes of Rhea Ripley, Michael Hamflett? Because devastating losses for them over the weekend, and people were rightly pissed on social media.
I don't know about Shayna because, well, I think Shayna and Rhea Ripley are different prospects on television at the moment. Shayna, a quick fix to me would be to bring up the Horsewomen alongside her. They genuinely enhanced their act on NXT without diminishing that she was hard as nails and dominant. It was just good that they could rely on like traditional heel methods of cheating, even when the fact that she was so unstoppable, she almost didn't need it. Unfortunately, what's happened on the main roster, she kind of does need it a little bit. So if anything, they can help her, not just help the act, but just get those wins back on the board and maybe just do something to make the whole package a bit more presentable again. Rhea Ripley is altogether different. I didn't have too big a problem with this at all. She stepped to Charlotte, who is the queen, and there has to come a time, and we say this a lot with Charlotte, where when you're the best and when you say the best and then you say the queen, you do actually have to win matches and accumulate wins in order to do that. I didn't think it was a burial of Rhea Ripley, which I've seen, and I feel that word gets abused quite a lot now. Their rematch, if indeed they do have one at a takeover, I feel like I say this all the time now, but if it's in an arena with a crowd, all of these are caveats of with a crowd, because that's what makes the difference. But that rematch on a takeover would be fantastic. Charlotte is a fantastic proposition for the NXT women's division, just like Shayna was, because this like gaggle of challengers that could potentially take her on have got an even bigger mountain to climb. It's fairly pattern for NXT to have the babyface champion not keep the belt very long. They prefer to book long-term champions, whether it be Asuka, who was kind of a tweener by the end, or Shayna, who was a heel. It's more about the babyface getting the moment and then getting the belt back onto somebody that just can't be stopped. And it's serviced that division very, very well. Charlotte is ideal in that position. And as long as Rhea Ripley isn't just dragged kicking and screaming to the main roster, I think she'll be absolutely fine. I think her redemption arc is now just trying to get that belt back, and there's no shame in that for a babyface to learn and grow.
Yeah, as for Baszler, I can't pretend that the idea of her mimicking her NXT run, which I liked but didn't love, particularly because I felt like it dragged on quite long, and I don't think she's as diverse as a performer that you need to be holding down the fort in a role like that for as long as she did. So I can't pretend that her replicating that on the main roster, which will not be anywhere near as good as it is in NXT. That's just a fact at this point. Inspires me with any great confidence, but at the same time, if you've got a character who is meant to be as hard as she is, then if she's not playing that Queen Bee total killer role, then her aura is diminished, and that aura just isn't the same. So it's quite a conundrum booking Shayna Baszler. I don't envy the main roster for doing it. As for Rhea Ripley and the complexion of the NXT women's division going forward, I wouldn't have had Rhea Ripley lose to Charlotte Flair at all. I think it's a kind of a cynical means of legitimizing NXT as a brand when you really had something in Rhea Ripley, and now she just feels a little bit too much like an underdog. It feels like she's every WWE babyface I've seen in years and years at this point. It feels like she's a bit gee whiz, how awestruck she is by an empty stadium, about how she's losing at the first step in a rain. Yeah, it just feels like she's not someone I want to believe in. Like, the best thing I've ever seen Rhea Ripley do is go straight up to Shayna Baszler's face and call her a bitch. You know what I mean? I just thought that was absolutely fantastic. I felt like she was a total badass. Felt like she'd stepped off the set of Mad Max, and now she feels like a WWE fan living out a dream.
That's going to be taken out of context, you realise, Cedric, and people are just going to think you want more bitch on Monday Night Raw. Like,
sweet bitch. Sweet bitch.
Mr. Heyman, no!
Finally here, two of the people who've come out of WrestleMania with the best reputations are the two guys who had the weirdest matches, being the Boneyard match and the phenomenal Firefly Funhouse match, in my opinion. Less so when it comes to The Undertaker. You can probably put him on ice for 6 months to a year, potentially, although they're probably going to want to do something with him around Survivor Series for the anniversary, of course. But how should Michael Sidgwick, The Fiend, and The Undertaker be booked going forward? Because these aren't people who you can just sort of slot into world title feuds, or at least you shouldn't.
I mean, you probably should, because why else are they there? I understand they can be deft about it. You can create, as the WWF once did, a series of fairly convincing grudge rivals for The Undertaker, and they can replicate this with The Fiend. The fact that he is a haunting presence who goes after people, it's just a thing that he does. He can't be booked outside the title picture. I don't know, because the more I say The Fiend, the less interested I am. And the more I'm reminded of the Firefly Funhouse match, the more I'm reminded of how much actual, and I can't believe I'm saying this for a third time, when am I going to learn? For a third time, there's actually potential in this Bray Wyatt character. I'm going to be saying this in 2025 when he does something good after 5 years of absolute tripe bollocks yet again. I don't know what you do with Bray Wyatt. Where do you go after that? Like, where do you go after that? If you want to preserve how special that was, for me, if he's not making a difference in ratings whatsoever, you further this aura that you've somehow recaptured for a second time after ruining to a completely laughable extent. You somehow try and recapture this by just holding off on having him even appear again. Like,
it's so weird. Like, me and Cedric were having this conversation over the social distance desks on Slack this morning, and it was nice on Sunday to feel what so many of those angry Stan accounts feel when they're screaming at you in the Twitter comments, because I didn't have to invent a narrative for Bray Wyatt. I was given one. The company worked incredibly hard alongside Bray. I saw what people tell us about his creative genius. I saw what Hollywood believes about John Cena's acting ability. I saw what the company that I fell deeply in love with when I was 5 years old in that Firefly Funhouse. I saw all of it, and it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. And now it feels like you have to preserve that Bray Wyatt character. You have to keep him away from television until something calls him back. He is a perfect pro wrestler for these times, because every match that he does can be a match like what we saw with the Firefly Funhouse match. It doesn't need to ever be 10 minutes on Raw. The promos, I thought, lent themselves pretty well to the eerie, empty venue setting. I liked the little trickery with him behind Cena's back was daft, but like I like the use of the tape thing to be able to have him on the balcony and then in the ring and all that sort of stuff. It fits. It really, really fits. And they're onto something here, but don't have him dragged into a storyline because he's a pro wrestler that has to be in an angle. Wait for the reason almost to come to him. John Cena returning was a reason for Bray Wyatt, the Fiend, to be there because he had 6 years of revenge and a lifetime of sadness to take out on John Cena on behalf of the fan base. So wait for a story as worthy as that again. I don't know who the guy is. The one that leaks out is Roman Reigns. And yet, obviously, we're likely to not be able to get there. If they're still intent on going through Bray's major opponents, that he would be like sort of accusing of ruining the first version of his character. One of the only really ones left that you could target in a major way, in the same way to Orso Sunday, would be Randy Orton. So Randy Orton is now a re-established.
Jesus Christ!
I know, like he's this re-established heel. He burnt down his house and he made all his friends turn on him and things like that. It's another way that they would deem rectifying all the old ills of the Bray Wyatt character. But I'm more optimistic than I would be normally because of what we saw on Sunday. I'm more like in favor of something like that as long as it doesn't end in a traditional match. I do not want to see an empty arena match between Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt. I want to see a Firefly Funhouse match. So it's whether or not they deem, let's say, Money in the Bank or a random episode of SmackDown worthy of such incredible production. If they're not going to go all in, don't go in at all.
It is imperative for me, that on SmackDown on Friday, when Braun Strowman cuts his promo of I'm the champion, that you go the lights out. You hear that piercing music that heralds the Fiend's arrival, and then he breaks the ring by coming up and then dragging Strowman down. Don't do that, bollocks. It's imperative. It's imperative. You can't go back to the Fiend character in the Panto horror villain because that's not where the money is. That's not where the buzz is. That's not where the intrigue is. You know what's funny is that this turned into a meme, a stick with which to beat him, right? When Bray Wyatt first came up with the Firefly Funhouse and the Fiend mask, he told, I think it was Tom Savini or one of his assistants who helped him out with the mask, brother, we just changed the industry. And everyone pissed themselves laughing months later. Because it turns out he did not, in fact, do anything of the sort. And yet maybe he just did on some micro level at WrestleMania Part 2 on Sunday night. So it is imperative that the Fiend, for me, you know what was genius about that match? BBC News. Anna Louise on BBC News there making it. It is imperative that you don't go back to more Fiend than Bray or this 50-50 personality split that was just like drawn so like binary. And obviously, you know what was fantastic about the Firefly Funhouse match? You know what was absolutely the genius masterstroke of the entire thing? How much was the Fiend in it compared to Bray Wyatt? It was like 90-10, 95-5. He appeared at the very end to put the mandible on, and that was it. For me, I know the evidence of TLC where he had that absolutely atrocious, weird thing with the Miz is contrary to what I'm about to say. But all along, apart from SummerSlam, Bray Wyatt as this Mr. Rogers get-up in the Firefly Funhouse was the funniest, the most captivating, the most intriguing. He got the buzz, and the Fiend after SummerSlam kind of ruined it and made it cartoonish. The example they need to follow with the Fiend and Bray Wyatt going forward after WrestleMania 36 is Jaws. They started to film the shark far too often in the motion picture Jaws to the point where you could see the wires, you could see the prosthetic, you could see that it wasn't a real shark and it was a little bit lame towards the end. And it was so much more powerful when they were talking about it, when there was a mythology around it, when you saw them in flash cuts and that big epic moment when he bites the boat and we're going to need a bigger boat. You need to treat the Fiend like Jaws. You need to keep him to a complete and utter minimum to the point where, one, you disassociate from the memories where he stunk up Hell in a Cell and like every time he's appeared on television, for my tastes. You can restore the magic of that Fiend character, which is necessary for the Bray Wyatt character to work. I grant that. If, in fact, you barely see him.
There was there was countless really great lines in the Firefly Funhouse, but there was a tacit acknowledgement that maybe they're screwing him up. This could have been a line delivered just in like to inform the John Cena program, but I felt it was something bigger. It was when he was talking about John Cena getting all the chances, and he said, all they've done for me is take them away. And then he just said, they're still doing it to me now. And I thought that was like pointed because it was in direct reference to the Goldberg match a month earlier. The Fiend has become this merch selling, like sort of the creation that they can monetize and they can use, but they have abused it already in almost record time. So he was reduced by Hell in a Cell to just more patter like the original Bray Wyatt version was. And I thought that was quite interesting that they included that in that speech. It was a suggestion within the body of that match that they know that they've done him dirty. They've done this earnest attempt to reinvent himself and let him down. And it'd be nice to think if the almost overwhelming critical praise that this match has received sets that back a little bit. We're in a time where we don't need to see him wrestle. And I think you're bang right what you say as well. The limitation of the Fiend being the guy to just put the nail in the coffin rather than to do the legwork of destroying and deconstructing John Cena was quite important for that match to work. I think any more of the Fiend, you would have, been in danger of ruining it. And I would like to see them trust their instincts there. And maybe if that is an acknowledgement that this hasn't worked, maybe they're going to get it right this time.
No,
Smash Cut
absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm not going to be a mug again. I'm going to put my balls on the table right now, figuratively. Calm down. This was an aberration. This was an aberration for me. WrestleMania 36, an aberration brought about by unique circumstances. This will not work going forward. That is my prediction. I don't want it to be right, but I think it will be.
Well, I will say this as well, just not to drag Bray back into the criticism we normally give him, but Cena's performance was exceptional in that, and it takes somebody with ultra security like Cena's got to be willing to give up a lot of his flaws as he did and lay them bare for the benefit of a story to be told. Bray might not get that willingness from some of his current colleagues that need their character to be more protected than John Cena does. So you can't, the 5-5 Funhouse, as brilliant as it was in concept, is maybe not something that everybody would be quite as willing to just broadcast their countless weaknesses on screen, because for them it's like, well, what do we do after? John Cena doesn't really need to worry about that. Roman Reigns can hardly be there and talk about, I was pushed a lot, wasn't I, in 2015? That's really damaging if you then got to be on SmackDown getting pushed the following week.
Yeah.
Plus, because the pig boy's getting his head kicked off by Randy Orton is what's going to happen. But let us know your thoughts on new directions for WWE after WrestleMania 36 in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, you can let us know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCulture WWE. You can follow all three of us as well. Watch there. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
M Sidgwick.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE. As I said, this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.